Well, with me here on set now is Francesca Albanese, who's the UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territory. She's here in Paris meeting with French government politicians and diplomats as well. Thanks very much for joining us on the programme.
Thank you.
A month ago, you said there was a risk of genocide in Gaza. It's a very strong word to use. Do you still stand by it?
It is a very strong word, and I've used it 3 times with dozens other special rapporteurs of the United Nations, raising the risk of genocide, the serious risk of genocide, and then referring to the fact that we might see a genocide unfolding when the victims were half of what they are today. Look, there is the risk of genocide. We are not a judicial body, so it's not up to us to make conclusions. But when there is the risk, of atrocities being committed, there is an obligation of the international community, of UN member states, to intervene and stop the operations. And this is not happening.
And do you think it's getting worse now, as well as Israel is now pushing, obviously, further south as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. But it was clear, even before the resumption of the hostilities, which is something all of us in the human rights community were fearing. Of course, you have 1.8 million displaced, Palestinians in Gaza displaced, amidst the destructions of 60% of the civilian infrastructure. There are no more hospitals. There are 40,000 people injured, among them children. 6,000 kids have been killed. This is not enough to prove that the end goal of this military operation is not the destruction of Hamas military capacity, and not even the destruction of Hamas. There is the destruction of Gaza ongoing, and international community is not only paralyzed, it's really showing no sign of willingness to intervene and stop the carnage.
What can they do, though?
They can do a lot. They can put pressure on the warring parties to stop the hostilities.
And you think they're not doing that? I mean,
no, they are not.
In what way? I mean, what pressure can they put on? They're not there. They don't have a presence in those countries. Just
before this interview, we were talking about Ukraine. Look at Ukraine, Russia-Ukraine. When there was an illegal war launched by Russia against Ukraine, immediately there was the resumption of all measures offered by the UN Charter to states, like diplomatic measures, political measures, and economic measures taken against Russia.
But it hasn't stopped the war there, has it?
No, it hasn't. But in any case, it was a means of pressure, because I think the pressure then changed. And this is always how much political convenience plays a role in conflict. But the situation is not equal, is not a valid parallel anyway, because the Palestinians are not at war as such with Israel. Israel is the occupying power. It has responsibilities toward the Palestinians as protected person under international humanitarian law. Israel cannot wage a war against the Palestinians, which is what the international community should have intervened to remind Israel and to stop Israel. While after 2 months of bombing, the only thing that I hear from political leaders is, well, Israel needs to respect international humanitarian law. Israel doesn't. Israel didn't respect international humanitarian law before the 7th of October, which is what contributed to lead to the situation.
Israel has to do something, though, doesn't it? I mean, what happened, I'm sure we all agree, on October the 7th was horrific.
Yes.
Why do they not have the right to, as they see it, defend themselves?
They do. Israel has the right, the sacrosanct right, to protect itself, its territory, and its citizens. There is no question about that. But you know, the right of self-defense under international law means something slightly different, more technical and deeper. It's the right to wage a war. And Israel doesn't have the right to wage a war against the population it maintains under belligerent occupation. And this is the big confusion. I understand that the larger public, people in the street, might not be able to make the difference. But I'm really shocked that at the political level, there has been not enough emphasis on this.
But as Hamas members are so ingrained in the society there, amongst the people of Gaza, the only way that Israel can ensure that it doesn't happen is to do something like this, isn't it?
Look, the reason why Hamas is so ingrained in that society is because of the blockade. Because we should remember that there have been attempts by the local population, for example, during the Arab Spring, there were protests led primarily by young women and men who wanted a change, who wanted unity, political unity with the rest of the Palestinians under occupation. And this has been crushed. And it has been possible. Hamas has remained in power because this was also in the interest of Israel. And Prime Minister Netanyahu, and he was not the only one, has been on record over and over saying that Hamas was an asset to Israel, while the Palestinian Authority was a liability, because Prime Minister Netanyahu is, for his own admission, the only one who can make sure that there is no Palestinian state in the occupied Palestinian territory.
So in the short term then, how do you think Israel should have responded to what happened on October the 7th?
Israel should have operated under the framework of international humanitarian law. So it should have repelled the attack, it should have neutralized the danger on its own territory, and it was surely authorized to carry out precise targeted strikes to neutralize the danger coming from Hamas. What it didn't have and what it has used was the right to bomb and to punish the entire population of Gaza.
But that surely wouldn't stop it from happening again in a week, in a month, in several years' time.
Precisely. If the goal was to weaken Hamas, it has done the opposite, because of course Hamas popularity is rising when the Palestinian people have been kept under military occupation, a sort of military dictatorship for 56 years. And especially in the last 16 months, there was an increase of violence and provocations and humiliations and indignities imposed on the Palestinians by soldiers and armed settlers themselves. And so Hamas is seen like somewhat the only one who can stand against Israel. So this is why I think it's very difficult now to disentangle the support for Hamas from average Palestinians.
There's been a lot of criticism as well, hasn't there, of the UN and particularly of the UN Security Council for not doing enough, and the war continues. What is there that you and your colleagues can do to try and mitigate the situation?
My colleagues and I keep on reminding the international community of international legal obligations, which frankly are the only tools that can lead us in a lead bloodshed type out of this situation, because international law is there to create a perimeter as a regulatory and remedial force to politics. But unfortunately, again, international law keeps on being pushed aside for political convenience.
Yeah, it's just words, isn't it? I mean, actual physically doing anything is incredibly difficult.
Yeah, but by doing so, we weaken the entire system that has been built on the ashes of the Second World War. Absolutely. This is the system that the international community has found to avoid war as a normal conduct and as a normal state of affairs. And this is weakening, especially there. I think this is also hampering the relationship between the Global South and the Global North, which is the latter is seen as a proponent of double standards through and through.
Good to have you on the programme today. Thank you very much for coming in and talking to us today. Francesca Albanese, she's the UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territory.